All right, welcome back from this holiday weekend. Hope you all had a great one. Today we're continuing our RBT exam practice question series, where we're going through some RBT exam practice questions and breaking them down together. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. We would really appreciate it. Check out rbtexamreview.com for all of our study materials. We offer 3 practice exams, a task list study guide, and our combo pack, which comes with everything. Those links are also in the comments and descriptions. Congratulations to everyone who recently passed their RBT exam. Make sure you let us know when you do pass so we can give you a shout out. Other than that, let's keep working hard, keep studying hard, get to our questions. Question 1. Your client will not pick up their toys when asked to clean up their space. You are told to use a high P request sequence. Which of the following examples best represents this intervention? Part of the battle of the RBT exam is knowing what the interventions are and how to define them. When you're asked to do things like use differential reinforcement, use the pre-map principle, use high P request sequences, the hardest part is knowing what those things are. Because once you can define them, and once you're fluent in terms and definitions, these questions become quite easy. For instance, this question, we want to use a high P request sequence. It's also known as a high probability request sequence or a high P low P request sequence. What is that? What is a high P request sequence? Well, we know it's when we ask a client or a learner to do simple known steps first, high probability steps, and then we follow with a low probability request. We're trying to build up behavior momentum. If we know that definition, this question becomes quite simple. So now that we know our definition, let's look at our answer choices and just try to find that example. So A, when your client picks up their toys, you provide them with praise and candy. Well, what are you doing? You're providing a consequence for picking up their toys in the form of what it looks like attempted reinforcement, not a high P request sequence. B, if your client picks up their toys, they can play video games for 10 minutes. In this case, the opportunity to engage in the preferred response is reinforcement on or contingent upon the engagement of the lower response. It's the opposite almost of the high P request sequence. B is the pre-map principle. They're not the same thing, so be careful. C, before you ask your client to pick up their toys, you ask them to clap their hands and then stomp their feet. So far, this is the best example of the high P request sequence. We don't know anything about the client, but given the information we do have, this is the only example of us asking the client to engage in some responses, some easy high probability responses, and then following it up with the low probability response. So far, C is our best answer. 3D. If your client doesn't pick up their toys, you take away 2 tokens. So again, a consequence intervention looks like an attempted punishment, not a high P request sequence. The only one where we're making request followed by the low probability request is going to be C. Again, if you know your interventions, this question becomes easy. And A, B, C, and D are all examples of interventions you're going to use as an RBT. So it's a good question to practice your knowledge of reinforcement, punishment, the pre-map principle, and a high P request sequence. A response cost procedure is a type of blank. Again, plenty of intervention questions, right? What is the primary role of the RBT? Implementation. RBTs implement treatment plans, they implement skill acquisition plans, and they implement behavior plans. In order to do it successfully, you need to understand the interventions you're using. All right, so in that case, we have a response cost. And what is a response cost? A response cost is typically used in a token economy, but it can be used elsewhere. And it's when you take away something as a result of a maladaptive behavior or behavior you don't want to see. So for instance, let's say screaming is our target behavior. Client engages in screaming, we take away a token. Client engages in screaming, we take away a toy. There's a cost for the response, hence response cost. Now, let's say you don't know what the response cost is as far as reinforcement or punishment goes. Think about the procedure. What are you doing? You're taking away something. And when you take away something, is that positive or negative? It's negative. So we know it's going to be a negative procedure. Are we trying to decrease or increase a behavior? Because if we're trying to increase, it's reinforcement. If we're trying to decrease, it's punishment. Well, we know it's in response to a maladaptive or target behavior we don't want to see. So we're trying to decrease it. So we're taking away something to decrease. A response cost procedure is a type of negative punishment. This is how we should be breaking down questions, how we should be going through each question, especially during practice. It's so much more important for you to get the questions right rather than do a million questions and get half of them wrong. You want to be getting every practice question correct. For 4 weeks, you worked with your client on tracing their name with a dry erase marker. This week, they finally were able to do it independently. However, when you handed the client a pencil and asked them to trace, they could not complete the task. What is most likely occurring? Don't even look at the answer choices, and just in your head, what is your first instinct? What is occurring here? Well, we know the client is able to independently trace their name with a dry erase marker, but when you give them a pencil, they can't do it. And what do we call it when we can't do a skill aside from the learned environment or the learned stimuli? We're lacking generalization, right? This client is unable to generalize from the dry erase marker to the pencil, which is obviously an issue. Why is it not maintenance? Well, maintenance is when a response occurs after teaching is stopped. We're still teaching them, right? We're still working with the client. Now we're just asking them to trace with the pencil instead. Training hasn't stopped completely. It's not maintenance. We're not in the maintenance phase yet. And then there's regression. Regression is kind of an open-ended thing. It's an idea more than a term, right? So almost never is regression going to be your answer, if at all, right? Not even on the task list. Okay. So D is just not the right answer. We're looking at generalization, the inability to take a skill and then transfer it to other stimuli or environments. So are we lacking stimulus generalization or response generalization? What do we ask ourselves? We ask ourselves, how many stimuli and how many responses? If there's one response with multiple stimuli, we're talking stimulus generalization. If there's a single stimuli with multiple responses, we're talking response generalization. Well, our response is tracing. Our stimuli is dry erase and pencil, so we have one response across multiple stimuli. There's a lack of stimulus generalization. We need the client to be able to trace with a dry erase marker, a pencil, a pen, so on and so forth, okay? Because we know at school and in real life, we can't use a dry erase marker everywhere. We have to be able to use a pencil. You want to use a differential reinforcement procedure to teach a replacement behavior, but you want that replacement behavior to look completely different than the target behavior. You should use what? So there are a couple hints here pointing you towards the right answer. First things first, we want to teach a replacement behavior. What DR procedure do we know that doesn't teach a replacement behavior? In other words, out of a DRA, DRI, and DRO, which one does not teach a replacement behavior? Well, DRO, right? DRO is reinforcing in the absence of a behavior, but we're not necessarily teaching a replacement. DRL also doesn't teach a replacement behavior, all right, but it's not necessarily one you need to know. You need to focus on DRA, DRI, and DRO. So that's our first hint. We can eliminate DRO, we can eliminate DRL. Second hint, you want the behavior to look completely different than the target behavior, meaning topographically, nothing alike, right? And if you want that behavior to be totally different, would you use an alternative strategy or an incompatible strategy? Well, clearly, we're going to use an incompatible strategy. We want this behavior to look completely different, okay? We don't want it to occur at the same time at all as the other behavior, okay? We want it different. And if we want it to look completely different and we want a different topography, we need to use an incompatible plan. So a differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. DRA just teaches a general replacement. DRI teaches something that looks different and can't occur at the same time. Which of the following basic reinforcement schedules is considered the slot machine effect? Now, I've used this question a few times in the past, but I think it's a good question because I think they want you to know, okay? This is a very common question in ABA. It's something you need to know in ABA, okay? So that being said, which of the following basic reinforcement schedules is considered the slot machine effect? Think about a slot machine. What are we doing? We put in money, and then we hit the button. Hit the button again, win. Hit the button, win. Then we hit the button 6 more times without winning. So we won after 3 presses. We won after 2 presses. We hit it 6 times and still haven't won. Is that schedule fixed or is it variable? Well, it's obviously variable, right? Fixed would mean every 2 responses we win. It's clearly not the case for a slot machine. It's on average, okay? We don't know the average. Second question is, are slot machines interval based or is it response based? Interval meaning time. So does it matter how long you sit at that slot machine? No, you could be at the slot machine for hours. It's all about responses, right? If I do one response in 10 hours, it doesn't matter, right? It's going to be based on responses for a slot machine, okay? So we have an average number of responses for a slot machine effect. Again, we're hitting that button. I win after 2 times. I win after 3 times. I hit it 6 more times. I still don't win. Variable ratio, VR. The slot machine effect is the VR basic reinforcement schedule. Of the following behaviors, what behavior would be least appropriate to measure using permanent product recording? Read carefully. Don't skip least. Okay, this question becomes hard if you skip that, right? You're probably going to get it wrong. We want the behavior, which is inappropriate to measure using permanent product. Think about permanent product recording. We're not typically observing the behavior happen. We're observing what the behavior produces or what happens and what stays around or what occurs as a result of the behavior, okay? Meaning we need something we can see, maybe something we can feel, something there that's tangible, right? A product of the behavior. If that behavior isn't producing something, we can't use permanent product. So A, your son cleaning up their room when asked. Can you go behind your son and check to see if their room is cleaner than what it was before? Absolutely. Cleaning up their room would absolutely produce a product. Cleaning anything is going to produce a product if you do it correctly. B, the quality of an essay written by a student. Do you need to observe the student writing the essay? No, right? The student can turn in the essay. You can look at it 3 days later. It's still going to be there. Okay, that's permanent product. The behavior produces a product that lasts so we can measure it later. C, self-injury that occasionally leaves a mark or scratch. Now be careful here. Do we want to use measurement on a behavior that only or permanent product measurement on a behavior that only occasionally leaves a product? Well, no, we're going to get wildly inaccurate results, right? Inconsistent results. If I on Monday see a mark, I record it. On Tuesday, no mark. On Wednesday, no mark. And on Thursday, I see a mark. And self-injury happened all 4 days. My data, if I use permanent product, will only show 50%. It's going to be just wildly inaccurate, right? We need consistent products to use permanent product. D, a client's ability to complete a list of chores. You can go behind them, see what chores they were assigned, and see if they did it or not, okay? That's going to always produce a product. C is going to give you inaccurate results if you're only occasionally receiving a product. It's not good enough. What typically causes ratio strain when working with a client? Again, this is when your terminology comes into effect. We need to know terms. What is ratio strain? Ratio strain is a slowdown or lack of responses due to a reinforcement schedule change, okay? Meaning, if we change our reinforcement schedule and we make our response requirement higher than it was before, significantly higher than what it was before, a lot of times clients will stop responding, right? They're used to getting reinforcement, let's say every 2 responses. If we go up to 10 responses, that is a huge increase in response effort. That causes ratio strain. So what are we doing there? Are we fading out reinforcement schedules too quickly? Yes. Fading out a reinforcement schedule means increasing the requirements for reinforcement. So we're fading that schedule. If we fade it too quickly, we can suffer from ratio strain, a lack of responding, okay, due to it too much of an increase in response requirement. What about B, fading out a reinforcement schedule too slowly? Well, no, you don't want to fade it too slowly, but rarely will you experience ratio strain, right? I mean, if you stay at a FR1 or 2 forever, that's not necessarily that's not necessarily going to cause ratio strain, right? I mean, the client is accessing reinforcement quite easily, okay? The problem is you might never generalize, you might not strengthen, you might not maintain. C, using an incorrect prompt has nothing to do with ratio strain. D, using a punishment procedure also has nothing to do with ratio strain. We're talking about reinforcement schedules here, increasing response requirement too quickly, causing a lack of responding. Our answer here is going to be A. Before starting a case, Brenda reviews the treatment plan for her client. She notices the behavior plan includes aggression and self-injury, but Brenda does not see a crisis or emergency plan. How should Brenda proceed? What is a crisis or emergency plan? It's a plan that tells you as an RBT what to do in the case that you or the client or someone else is in danger. They're extremely important. They're required. They help keep us safe. They help keep the client safe. They help us do no harm. Okay. Ethically, we need this plan in place, especially if we have aggression and self-injury. Sure, maybe the aggression is mild, the self-injury is mild, and you don't feel threatened or the client doesn't feel threatened, but these are serious behaviors. If something goes wrong, you need to know what to do. In this case, Brenda doesn't. Brenda does not see a plan. What does Brenda need to do? As the RBT, what does she need to do? A, start working on the case. She shouldn't question the treatment plan before working with the client for the first time. Just wrong, right? Questioning the treatment plan before working with a client is exactly what you should be doing. Make sure you understand every piece of it, the history, the behavior plans, the skill plans, everything, okay? You don't just go in there without asking questions out of fear of looking stupid or out of fear of being reprimanded. Communication and collaboration are key. So A is wrong. B, start working on the case. During her next supervision meeting, ask the supervisor why there is not a crisis plan. Okay, better, but should we wait till the next supervision meeting? What if supervision doesn't happen for 3 weeks? We now have 3 weeks without a plan, which is just too long. We need to act immediately. C, refuse to work the case until a plan is in place or an explanation is given for why a plan is not in place. Yes, this is communication. This is collaboration. Brenda should go to her supervisor and say, hey, I noticed that there's no crisis or emergency plan. I'm not comfortable without one. Can you explain to me why there isn't one? And can we put one in place? This is Brenda being a good team member. She's looking out for her interest. She's looking out for the client interest. And she's looking out for the supervisor's interest. C is the best way to approach it. And then D, report her supervisor for neglecting the client. No, we don't need to go that far yet. Again, she hasn't even talked to her supervisor yet, what she should prioritize above everything else. When it comes down to it, we prioritize communication. We prioritize collaboration. Our answer here is C. And then differential reinforcement involves which of the following two components? This is a very, very commonly missed question and a very commonly asked question. What is differential reinforcement? Differential reinforcement is simply reinforcing a behavior, putting another behavior on extinction. So which two components comprise differential reinforcement? A, reinforcement and punishment. No, punishment is not part of differential reinforcement. B, reinforcement and extinction. Yes. Okay. We're reinforcing one thing, putting another thing on extinction. C, punishment and extinction. No, punishment is not part of it. And then D, reinforcement only. No, we also need an extinction component as well. Differential reinforcement involves reinforcement and extinction. Thank you so much for watching. Please visit rbtexamreview.com for all of our study materials. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Congratulations to all of those who passed recently. Let us know when you pass. As always, work hard, study hard. See you soon.